Next, we have Naomi Tutu. One of my favorite inspirational quotes comes from Desmond Tutu, Naomi Tutu's father. He says, "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor." Naomi Tutu is a leader in the fight for social justice, an advocate for human rights, a champion for change. So please welcome Naomi Tutu.
I'll stay here for now. Good evening. It is truly fun to be here this evening. I have had a wonderful time from the time I stepped in here. The food was amazing. I got to spend some time with some wonderful young people who put together the, what is the journal called? Newsflash, there you go, who put together Newsflash, and there's a mini interview of me in there, so you better get this issue. And have got to see many people who I have come to know over my many years of being invited to Minneapolis in the winter. I've given up. I just know now that this is the only time you people want to see me, is when there is snow on the ground. So I just give up. I give up. It is really great to be working with Youth Prize, and in particular with Woki. I've worked with Woki from doing the Gathering of the Elders at the NYLC conference for many years, and have come to see her as a sister from another mother, and I'm just amazed at the work that she is doing, and Youth Prize is truly blessed to have her. And so thank you to Woki, thank you to Youth Prize for having me be part of this, and thank you as a community for being interested in this conversation. And I mean, it is amazing that we are still in this conversation in 2014. Are we slow learners or what? I mean, when we think of the Pan-Africanist congresses that happened in the 50s and 60s, which brought together the leaders from this country and from the African continent who were talking about our shared struggle, our shared story, and here we are. Come on, people. Come on. I say that, and at the same time, I recognize how we have, in a way, been set up to be in this conversation, which is actually, to be in the conversation is a step forward from what we have been set up for, because we have been set up for conflict and misunderstanding amongst the children of Africa. When I first came to this country, I like to tell people that, I claim being a slow learner. So, I claim it. And so I'm always like 6, 7, 20 years behind the curve. So when I came to this country, I was full of the Pan-Africanist congresses and of the stories of people like Malcolm X, and recognizing that commonality that Malcolm X went to Africa to experience and to make those connections. And Nelson Mandela went through the continent of Africa and went to Europe to build on those ties, so that our leaders, in the past knew that our struggles were connected. And so I came to this country ready, that I'm going to be with my brothers and sisters in our common struggle. And I landed in Kentucky, and that might explain a bit about what happened, but I'm not going to blame it all on Kentucky, because I arrived, and the African American students who I came to know, there you go, English is my fourth language, people, so I can be excused. And that people were saying, oh no, I'm not African. What do you mean African? I don't identify with that continent at all. And one of my best friends now, who, when she was first introduced to the man who is now her husband, we laugh about it, when they were going around introducing themselves as freshmen, and he stood up and he said, my name is, and I'm from Rhodesia. She said, I turned to my friend from home and I said, see, he's not African, he's from Rhodesia, he's okay. And he's like, and the friend said, where is Rhodesia? I don't know, but it's okay. But that was what I came up against. That no, I'm not African. And then I started looking at how Africa is portrayed in this country. And all that we ever saw of Africa on the news or in movies was famine or war. Famine or war, disasters, civil wars, dictators. That was the only stories that we saw of Africa, unless we were watching Tarzan. And the only person standing for right on the continent was a white man, right? And the Africans were running from everything. I mean, everything. Lions, tigers, each others. I mean, they were just running constantly. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, heck no, I'm not African either. Shoot. Why would I claim that? Let me get my accent right. Okay. And then the African students I was meeting were saying, I'm not black. I'm like, what? But then I thought about it, that for most students from the continent, race has not been the identifier. Imagine a young woman in Nigeria one day saying to her family, I'm black. They would look at her like she was really slow. It's like, yeah, so is everybody else around here. Why did you feel the need to share that particular bit of information with us? Are you slow? So, yes, for most students from the African continent, black was not an identifier that they had used growing up. And so there was a level in which when they said, I am not black, it was saying, that is not my primary identifier. But it also was part of the roots, part of the seeds, the effects of divide and conquer. Because if you see how the U.S. is portrayed in movies and TV shows that make it to the African continent, blacks are the criminals, the drug pushers, the prostitutes, the troublemakers. And like those Africans with Tarzan, the ones who are always running. Whenever there's something, they're out, they're gone. And so some of my friends from the African Student Association would tell me, my parents told me, stay away from Black Americans. And we had in place, well, we have still in place a system that encouraged us to think that being seen as an exceptional Black was somehow a positive. I tell people all the time that when we were growing up in apartheid South Africa, African Americans would come to South Africa on business. Many of them actually were invited by the South African Council of Churches and were coming as clergy to offer support to the anti-apartheid struggle. And but that the reality was that under apartheid, African Americans were considered honorary white, right? And our responsibility as my father's children was usually to be taking our guests shopping. And so we would be taking them shopping. We'd go into a shop, and a white South African would hear this American accent, and all of a sudden they would, oh, you're from America. Where in America are you from? How wonderful. And would say with no shame or embarrassment to be saying it in front of a South African, oh, but we know you're not like our Blacks. You're educated. Your experience is different. And so the temptation was there for people then to say, oh, I'm that exceptional Black, right? And then I came to this country, and all of a sudden, I was the exceptional Black. Oh my gosh, what a beautiful accent. Where are you from? You're not like our Blacks. Wow. And the temptation to say, no, I'm not, exists for many of us. That we want to buy in to the idea that we are somehow different. Right now, when I go home to South Africa, I still have that same experience because my children now speak with American accents. And so I will be walking into a shop, and they walk really slowly. I don't know whether that's from being raised in this country or just, I don't know. I don't even know what it is. But they walk slowly. So I will walk into a store, and they will be 200 paces behind me. So I'm walking with my cousin or a friend, and we're speaking Xhosa, and then in come my children. That's an American accent, in case you didn't know what I was doing, okay? And all of a sudden, white shop attendants are paying attention to my children. I'm like, oh, that's fine. They don't have any money. It's in this Xhosa woman's purse, so keep being nice to them. But that idea, that is divide and conquer on the ground. And for many of us, that divide and conquer is tempting in that instant, that it will make my life a little better today, that I will get a little better treatment than I would normally get as a person of color. Let me accept it for this little instance. I mean, really, what is that going to do? What it does is continue the idea that we can be divided. What it does is put in someone's mind that we too believe that there are better blacks and not so bitter blacks. So if we are going to build a united community, and we've done it. I mean, I talked about the Pan-Africanist Congress, but we did it in the 70s and 80s too, in the struggle against apartheid. Because it was through the offices of organizations like Trans-Africa, it was through the Congressional Black Caucus, it was organizations like that and churches and colleges that said, we as an African people are going to speak for the people of Africa. And we are going to make sure that our politicians in this country, the US, know that their positions on Africa are as important to us as their positions on our domestic policy. And it made a difference. So we know we can do it. We know we can be a force to be reckoned with. But in order to be that force, we have to first start unpacking the stories we have been told about one another. And we have to start listening to the things that we say about each other. And we have to start paying attention to the tapes that play in our heads about who we are and what our shared heritage actually means. Our shared heritage, these young children, these young people who were doing African dance a minute ago, beautiful, beautiful. And yet, too often, that's where our common heritage ends, is when we take our children to do African dance. That we don't then carry on beyond the cultural exchange to share the historic lesson. We don't go beyond the joy of the music and dance to the pain of our struggles, to the sacrifices that have been made. That then we don't go beyond cheering for the wonderful show, to connecting our children to the stories of children of Africa. And I'm not even talking about going to South Africa or Ghana or wherever to have those conversations. I'm talking about Minneapolis, St. Paul, having those conversations. That in our very communities, we look at each other with suspicion. We talk about those Africans or those African Americans with disdain in our voice. We spend time angry about the differences in our stories and miss the common core. I'm always so distressed when I spend time with my friends who are first and second generation African immigrants. And they talk about African Americans in their community. And they have never had a conversation with an African American in their community. I am so upset when I spend time with my African American friends and they keep talking about those Africans. Like I'm not an African, first of all, which I always remind them. Excuse me, African in the room? But they talk about those Africans in their community, and they have never sat and spoken to an African in their community. And I say to both groups of friends, you know, it isn't a mistake that we keep talking about one another and not talking with one another. That our suspicions of one another are fed daily in the media, in the news, in the stories that are highlighted, in the ways that the powers that be try to highlight the differences. But my people, you know, we have shown over and over in the struggles that have taken place in this country, on the continent, in Europe, in South and Latin America, we have shown over and over that we are a people who are resilient, who can find ways of building solidarity, who can find ways of unbalancing the power structure. We know we can. So why aren't we now? What is it that keeps us from setting up weekly African people's meetings, whether it's in our school, in our church, in the community in which we live? We pass each other on the streets all the time. And very often when we pass each other on the streets, we are looking at one another with suspicion and distrust. What would it take for us to convene community gatherings like this? Not in February, and not the whole community? How about the people in your particular neighborhood? What about the people in that particular apartment complex in which we live? An African people's evening. And we can bring food because we like to cook. Well, I don't, but I like to eat, so we can bring food. We can do dance and drum. But the focus has to be on conversation. The focus has to be on starting by saying, in this room, my brothers and sisters, in this room, we are about to build one of the blocks of Pan-Africanism. And to build that block, we are going to start the conversation with what are the stories we have been told about one another. And once we've said, okay, this is what we have been told about one another, then we say, and now we are going to tell our stories to each other. So let me tell you my story of being an African immigrant in this country, and how I feel on the margins of the margins. Or let me tell you my story of being an African American in this country, and how I feel that each new group of immigrants is encouraged to step on my head to move on. Let's tell our stories. Let us speak to one another in complete honesty and with the utmost respect. The young people who titled their presentation Ubuntu. Ubuntu. And what she spoke about was the proverb that comes out of the concept of Ubuntu. But Ubuntu is even more than I am because you are. Ubuntu says that when you see another human being, you recognize in them someone of infinite worth. So when we have our circles of people of the African diaspora, we start from that place of Ubuntu. So that even as I tell you how angry I become when I am stereotyped as an African or as an African American, or as I tell you how upset I am that you have believed the stories that you have heard about me, your sister, without coming to hear them from me, that I am saying it to you from a place of utmost respect. A belief that we can't move forward until we admit what we have suffered. what we have caused one another to suffer, how we have been used as tools to increase each other's suffering. That when we speak of a shared heritage, our common story, that we also make clear our shared pain and the role that we have often played in each other's pain. We gather this evening to celebrate. To celebrate that we are here. We are still here. We are still here after thousands were stolen from the continent. We are still here after thousands died in slave ships. We are still here after thousands were killed by colonizers on the continent. We are still here after thousands lost their lives in the struggle against apartheid. We are still here after Jim Crow, after lynchings. We are still here as countries on the continent were made proxies in the Cold War. We are still here even today as our young are murdered by people claiming to stand their ground. We are still here. We are still here, and we are still strong. And we are here to celebrate because we know we will only get stronger as we share our stories and build a real family of the African diaspora. We are here to celebrate, but we are also here to pledge ourselves in the respect of those thousands that I just mentioned, to honor those who continue to die today, here and on the continent, and in a pledge to those who are coming after us, that what was dreamt of, that Pan-African movement, has not faded, has not disappeared, but is being revived today, here, in this community. Thank you.